a way just to be comforted, to be together with everybody. I remember feeling a little empty last year, being inspired, uplifted by our speaker and hearing his story. But then at the same time, you just shut off that Zoom and you're just all alone, with your whoever else is in the room with you, and that was it. And to be together with everybody, to remember and to commemorate, to be inspired and to learn is part of the process when we are doing it together. Today's called Yom HaShoah v'HaGvura. Specifically, it's not just a day of remembrance of the Yom HaShoah, but HaGvura specifically marking the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, to remember not just those that were murdered and killed, but those that survived, thrived, and were resilient throughout their lives. I want to thank those that were involved in this event and the planning for tonight. Thank you to Dina Jarashow and to Larry Witman, who's really their foresight that brought this program to where it is today. If you did not read the emails, I want to just give a background to the unique program that we have tonight. As Moshe said, and I wrote in the email yesterday, that it's becoming harder and harder to find survivors that can share their stories. If survivors are with us and they're amongst the living, their memory is a little bit not so great, or it's harder for them to get around, and it's becoming more difficult. I reached out to a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Zav Goldberg from Fort Lee, and he said to me, you have to hear Saul Graff's story. You have to call him. He's getting a little bit older, but he's sharp. And his story is something that needs to be told, and it needs to be heard to everybody. And he said, all you need to do is you call him up. I remember where I was in Borough Park with my kids, and just call him, ask him if he can come, and then we'll coordinate everything with his daughter. Irit is with us today. Irit is watching over Zoom. Welcome, and thank you for allowing us to do this evening. And he said, I feel an obligation, I feel a responsibility, that if I have a story, I need to share it, because there's so few of us that are left that I need to share it. And that's the way it was. And over the next week, I found out that Larry was related to him. Larry's nephew married his granddaughter. Larry Graff got to sit with him for a few hours over Chol Hamoed Pesach. And then the news came on Motzei Yontif. Rabbi Goldberg called me and shared with me that unfortunately Mr. Graff was nifter on Achron Shel Pesach, the last day of Pesach. The day where we talk about when we say Yizkor, the invocation for us to remember is the day that Mr. Graff passed away. Shocked was the reaction of his family, including his wife Aviva, who should have a refuah shlema. And that's where we are today. That his daughter and wife were in the middle of Shiva. And it was Dina's really brilliant idea, thank you, to ask his grandson Meir to share his story. Meir and Mr. Graff were writing the speech together on Chol Hamoed Pesach. They were writing and working on the story together. You said it was in big print, so your grandfather could read it. And Dina asked Meir if he would be honored if he can share this story with us, because like Rabbi Goldberg said, it needs to be shared. And that's where we find ourselves today. We thank Meir, we thank the Witman and the Graff families for sharing the story with us this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Meir in a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to first introduce Mr. Graff. We have a 9-minute clip from Saul's speech that he gave 3 years ago in Yom Israel Fort Lee. And we're going to play it now on the screen. And you're going to be able to hear. Wait. You'll be able to hear. his voice, his intonation, and the way that he gave over the story. Following the 9-minute clip, Meir is going to give over and share his grandfather's story in first person, the way that his grandfather would have said it over himself tonight.
Designated as the loading point into Catholic cars on the way to Birkenau, Auschwitz. One thing stuck vividly into my memory from these days. To weaken and destroy our morale, one day we were ordered to the central yard of the ghetto to watch as all the rabbis ordered to walk around with their beards shaven off and into their head a cross being cut in. Eventually, the day came when we loaded and jammed into Catholic cars. I do not remember how many people into a car, but as much as I remember, it was extremely crowded. My father was not traveling with us in the same car because his dire condition of very advanced tuberculosis. Therefore, he was loaded into another Catholic car together with other gravely ill people. We traveled a few days without knowing our final destination. We suffered from terrible thirst and hunger, but the worst of it was that we had to relieve ourselves into a barrel in the car by other persons holding up the blanket. You can imagine our embarrassment and the unbearable stench in the car, especially toward the end of the journey. Finally, after a few days' travel, we arrived to the infamous Birkenau's railroad ramp. The doors of the wagons were opened, and we were welcomed with shouting SS men, with dogs shouting, "Raus, raus, out, out." In addition to the SS men, we met inmates dressed in striped pajamas who helped us down from the Catholic cars and started to unload our belongings while assuring us that we will have our luggages later on. We were ordered to form two columns, men and women separately. 5 people in a row. This was a preparation for the selection process. At this time, I paid attention that my father was laying on the ground, not to be able to stand up with the rest of the people. I walked over him, and then, with a weak voice, he told me to take his overcoat because he will not need it anymore, and at the same time telling me his final farewell. At that time, after taking his overcoat, I joined my mother at the women's column because I had no father to stay with in the men's column. Suddenly, from nowhere, an inmate in a striped pajama pushed me to the men's column. After a while, I sneaked back to my mother, of course, and again the same inmate pushed me to the men's column. This scenario repeated itself 2 or 3 times. The Malach, the saving angel, he knew that if I stay with my mother, both of us will be sent surely to the gas chambers, as it happened to all my friends in my age from my town. Being a very fat kid with a large overcoat given me by my father, I looked as a mature man, and therefore I mistakenly was chosen to stay alive as a future slave laborers. It was my first encounter with miracle, By it, I was saved to stay alive. After the selektia process, we were taken to the showers to be showered and removing our hair from our head and from all our bodies. At that instant, of course, without any clothes, my real age became obvious. I was sent to the barrack 21 in the gypsies camp, which was the children's barrack. The barrack has a gypsy black L-tester, barrack commander, who after my naive question, when can I see my mother again? He answered, I will never see her again. You can imagine my shock and disbelief. The barrack was an abandoned Polish army horse stall, but this time this was our sleeping place, rather of the horses. Each evening we had to bring in from the yard wooden planks a few feet long and lay them each next to other on the concrete floor, and in the morning revert the process. Those planks next to each other on the floor were our beds. After finishing laying the planks, we were ordered to enter the barrack and sit down with our legs spread wide apart for the purpose that next kid could sit between the spread legs, therefore to able to jam in the maximum amount of kids as inhumanly possible. Slowly, we became aware what Birkenau is about. Day and night, huge chimneys emitted billowing smoke which smelled burning flesh. The smell was very prevalent in the camp. In addition, also rumors surfaced which reinforced our knowledge about the gas chambers and the crematoriums. Our mood and emotion became more and more desperate from day to day. Days after day, we were chased out from the barracks, sitting all along between two barracks in any weather, doing nothing but participating in innumerable appeals, which meant standing information while waiting for an SS man who counted us and recounted us. In our desperation, we wanted to pray to the HaShem, but I remembered only a few words of davening, Avinu Malkeinu, and no more than that. I have no idea how and why, only those words from home stuck in my mind. With set days in and out, and repeating to no end, Avinu Malkeinu, without knowing the meaning of the words. From Birkenau, after tattooing a serial number B7885 in my left arm, my journey to additional 5 concentration camps started. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. At the closing, I would like to add only that today, May 4th, exactly 71 years ago, I was liberated by the 71st U.S. Army Division from the concentration camp Gunskirchen in Austria. Thank you for listening.
Whose father? This guy, the guy was a father, that was the father who passed away.
My grandfather's story.
Oh, in a previous thing. Got it. Oh, a grandfather.
As you know, my grandfather, Shlomo Graff, Saba Zoldi, passed away to Shabbos. Our family, consisting of his wife, daughter, son-in-law, 3 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren, had the schus of spending the entire Chag with Saba Zoldi in our town.
That's usually
A beautiful Yom Tov, with her whole family to get together.
Special.
Overflowing my Saba and I
Now?
It was an old video. He spoke somewhere.
Oh, can I have rice though now?
Can
you mute yourself, please?
Oh.
My Saba lived to tell us tale, and he was therefore so looking forward to come here to speak, to share a story with you. Hashem had other plans for my Saba, and after spending these magically outfit together, Hashem was returned to his creator in Shem Salia. As befitting of the true tzaddik he was, he passed away on Shabbos in his sleep, surrounded by his family who loved him and adored him more than anything in the world. My mishpacha has lost their family patriarch, but he's truly lost for our people. As you heard and you will hear, my grandfather survived and experienced the worst, the world's most despicable and evil mankind has ever known at the hands of Nazi Germany. And yet, if you read it, you'd never meet a person with greater simplicity. He had the most infectious smile, an unmatched charisma, and a love for life, his family and his people. I know I'm not alone when I say that I am today who I am because of my Saba. No one and nothing can ever replace my Saba Zoli, and I hope by giving over the speech he prepared, I can honor his memory and should be his close person, HaShoah. As Rabbi Markowitz said, I'm going to give it over in first person because that's what he wrote. Good evening, dear congregants, may I call you dear friends. First, many thanks to Rabbi Markowitz and Rabbi Goldberg from Yemi Israel Fort Lee, who gave me the opportunity to share with you my life story during the very sad days of the Shoah, the Holocaust. In a few words, my participation in the glorious days of our country, Medinat Yisrael. I was born in a small town in Hungary called Mosan Magyora in the west of the country. On March 19, 1944, when I was 14 years old, we woke up hearing loud noises from German tanks and trucks rolling through the street, and the town's population were clapping their hands, happily greeting the invading German troops. It was clear to all of us that the German occupation of Hungary had begun, and as a result, our relatively peaceful lives had come to an end. At Pesach, I remember our family having its last Seder together. As the youngest, I asked the Manishtan. All the windows were carefully curtained, as was mandatory those times, in order to make sure no light could be seen from outside. This kept the town dark, so it would be very difficult for the overflying Allied planes to locate our town. This served us as well because it also avoided any outside onlookers seeing our last Seder in progress. 2 months after the occupation, in May 1944, we were ordered to abandon our homes, taking with us only what we could carry in our hands, and move into the ghetto, which was established in a few houses around the shul. In the ghetto, we were crammed several families into one room without any furniture. At nights, all of us slept on the floor. In addition, all the Jews from the surrounding little villages were brought into our ghetto. Myself and others of my age were probably least affected by the new awful situation and surroundings. Looking back today, I cannot imagine how my mother, and for that matter, any adults, were able to continue living their lives after abandoning in a blink of an eye all their possessions and wealth. One day, the ghetto population was ordered to go to the major square of the brickyard. We had no idea the purpose of our major gathering. In no time, we became forced witness as spectators to the most cruel and brutal act forced upon the rabbis and dignitaries found in the ghetto. They were forced to march in front of us around the square after their beards were shaved off and a cross cut into their head there. The whole purpose of the shameful parade was to demonstrate to us and to our rabbis the helpless situation we were in and to prepare us psychologically for even the worst things ahead. In June 1944, we were ordered again to pick up our belongings, and with a heavy Hungarian police escort, we walked to the rail yard to start our journey to Birkenau, Auschwitz. Of course, at that time, when they were loading or rather cramming us into catapults, we had no idea of our final destination. I have no idea how many of us were forced into the cattle car, which was extremely crowded, hot, and very uncomfortable. After that, the doors were slammed shut and locked from the outside. After all the cars were filled to capacity, the train started to move. I had no recollection of how many days we traveled to Birkenau, Auschwitz. I recently learned that the trip took 4 days and 4 nights. The only source of air were from 4 small windows in the walls of the car very high above the floor. The windows were closed by mesh of barbed wire secured outside the wall of the car. From the whole trip, the only things I remember clearly, and the memory still haunts me today, is the horrible stench that resulted because everybody had to repeat themselves into uncovered large containers that were placed in one of the cattle car's corners. Besides the stench emanating from the container, I remember the indescribable embarrassment that each of us had to tolerate and suffer as they relieved themselves, while only a bedsheet held by two persons separated them from the other people in the car. Finally, our horrible journey came to an end. As our train stopped, we heard yelling in German, "Raus, raus," which means out, out, and loud doors barking. The sliding doors of the car swung open, and we were instructed to leave everything behind and climb down from the cars. The cars were being unloaded by strange dressed people. They wore pajama-like striped outfits that included the same style of hats. All the guards and officers were in German uniforms with the infamous SS insignia on their uniform lapels. At this point, it became clear to us that we were no longer under Hungarian control. Rather, we were solely in the German authorities' hands. As soon as we all descended from the train, we were instructed to create separate columns, one for men and one for women. Of course, at that time, we had no knowledge of the meaning and the reason for those columns in formation, and only later learned the purpose of the columns, which was the infamous selexia, the selection for death, for life or death in the gas chambers. My father was not with us in the railroad car, and at this point, we had no idea to wear our belts. Having no father with us as a child, I stood in line with my mother in the woman's column. As we were standing there, all of a sudden, I saw my father lying on the ground next to the railroad cars, not far from us. With a natural instinct, I tore myself away from my mother's hand and ran to my father. Not realizing the great danger I put myself and my father in. As I stood next to my father, he could not stand up from the ground as a result of weakness. And only then I realized what a grave and perilous condition he was in. He told me with a weak voice that I could hardly hear to return to my mother and to take along his furred winter coat, which he carried with him till now, because as he said, I do not need it anymore. I immediately did as he said. This was the last time I ever saw my father. As soon as I returned to my mother, while standing in line with her, all of a sudden from nowhere, a striped pajama wearing person grabbed my hand and without saying anything, pushed me to the men's column. Standing there without my father or mother, among total strangers, I felt totally lonely and lost. Of course, not understanding the meaning and helpless purpose of not standing with my mother, I looked around, hoping that the man could push me to the men's line was not around me. I ran back to my mother. To my mother's and my astonishment, the same striped pajama man grabbed my knee again and tossed me again to the men's column. I do not remember exactly if this happened once or twice more, but my mother told me with a very sad, resigned voice, my son joined my uncle in the men's column. Soon, finally I did. So finally I did. Looking back today, I fully understand and appreciate what the man did for us. His idea was that, as we learned later, that I would stay with my mother, surely we would both been sent to the gas chambers. Indeed, none of my similarly aged friends survived the process. I survived most probably only because I was standing in the men's column wearing my father's large coat. And being, relatively speaking, a fat child, I was mistakenly chosen as a healthy, able-bodied adult man and sent to the right side during the selective selection process, which meant that I was chosen to stay alive and become a slave labor. After the selexia, we were ordered into a large shower room some distance from the railroad. There we were ordered to take off all our clothes, including our underwear and shoes. We stayed, all of us, completely naked, being ready for the next stage of our welcoming procedure. All the hair from our head and body was then removed by inmate barbers who were well trained in the process. They had already done it to hundreds or thousands of times to others before us. After our hair was removed, we were all seated on the bare concrete floor for a few hours. Looking around, I saw a sign on the wall listing names of inmate categories with different colors of triangles next to the names. The categories, as I remember, were criminal, political, homosexual, gypsy, and lastly, Jew. This sign, its listed categories drew my attention. I still remember it today because by listing the Jew last, it hinted about the very last and least important stature among all the others. After a while, we were given the infamous striped pajama style clothing and were assigned to different camps and barracks commenced. Being a child, I was separated from all the others and taken to the so-called Ziegenlager, which meant gypsies camp. Barrack number 21, also called the Child's Barrack Club. There I was welcomed by the barrack commander, who was a tall, relatively young gypsy man. Of course, I was totally disoriented and scared. Not only was I not with my mother, but I was even separated from the last few adults I knew from my town. I felt such loneliness as I had never felt before in my life. In this horrible state of mind, I asked the gypsy block officer, the barrack commander, who was welcoming me, the obviously naive question, that being, when can I see my mother again? In a sarcastic tone, his cruel answer was, "You will never see your mother ever again," pointing to the billowing smokes from the large chimneys. Of course, at that time, I had no idea about the chimneys and the meaning of the billowing smoke from them. The food supply was meager and undernourished. Some coffee-like black liquid in the morning, some soup for lunch, and a small ration of bread for the night. Our physical conditions deteriorated day by day. Some Hungarian boys from the barrack and I wanted to pray, but none must be prayers for my heart. Then it dawned on me, I remembered a very few Hebrew words from the prayer that we said in the word. The words were Avinu Malkeinu Al Tashlefenu, but I remembered no more than that. We did not know the meanings of the words, but sometime in our desperation for hours, we heard the words Avinu Malkeinu Al Tashlefenu, Avinu Malkeinu Al Tashlefenu, on and on. Today I know the meaning of those words, which are our Father, our King, do not forsake us. In August 1944, I was transferred with a group of children to Auschwitz to learn bricklaying. The whole group of 200 children, including me, were taken to be tattooed on our left arm, as was customary for those inmates who were fortunate to be chosen to be sent for slavery. My number, which I still carry today with certain sadness and pride, is B7885. Shortly after my arrival in Auschwitz, the holy day of Yom Kippur arrived. To our great surprise, the daily inmate supervisor agreed to our request to keep the morning and lunch rations for the night. Thus, we were able to fast at Yom Kippur in Auschwitz. To this day, I don't know how we had the strength to do so. A few weeks later, we marched back to Birkenau. We were extremely scared because we had already come to understand that Birkenau was not a work camp, but a death camp. We finally arrived at Birkenau, our bodies shaking and ready for anything that would come at us. To our amazement, a few railroad cars were waiting for us, and we were instructed to mount into them. I am sure of one thing, that our prayers and thanks were heard by God. After a long trip, we arrived in Sachsenhausen, Germany. Our stay in Sachsenhausen was in the middle of the winter. Therefore, standing outside in the yard all day long, day in and day out, caused a lot of us suffering from the winter's cold. We made an effort to alleviate our suffering from the cold by devising a system of crowding ourselves next to each other by the barracks walls. After a short time in Sachsenhausen, we were marched out from the camp to a small camp called Lieberosen. We stayed there for a short time and did nothing when we were there. To this day, I don't fully understand why we were taken there. After a short while, we were on the road again. What I remember of this journey is that during some part of the trip, we were walking through a city or village during a night, and what is clearly etched in my mind is that before we left, we were given, as odd as it sounds, Dutch wooden shoes. Therefore, our walking through a village paved road was quite noisy and ear-shattering afar. As we found out later, our final destination was again our previous main camp, Sachsenhausen. This time again, our stay in Sachsenhausen was short. After a few days, we were again on the road, headed towards Austria. But this time there was no train or trucks. It was a death march. After many months in different camps being meagerly fed, we were almost at the limit of our strength, and a lot of the inmates, including some members of the HaShoah, did not make it, falling by the wayside and being executed on the spot by the murderous German guards. During the nights, a few times we were left to rest for the nights in large barns. This was quite a relief compared to the other times when we were forced to sleep out in the fields during the cold nights. The Germans gave us nothing to eat during this march, so we were forced to find anything we could to eat. I learned that early in the morning, snails surfaced in the grass next to the road on which we were marching. I was able to collect a few of them each morning, and after breaking their shell, I was able to feast on them and sustain myself during the trip. When the snails were not available, I found another bizarre way to feed myself. I do not know where I found the hoof of a horse that I carried with me all along the journey. With the help of a spoon, I was able to scratch out the inner soft part of the hoof. That, in addition to the snails, sustained me all along the trip. Then, somewhere along the march, I found out that I had developed a skin disease called scabies, which was very prevalent sickness among the camp's population, and carried the German name Kretze. In most cases, the carrier was eliminated to prevent further spreading of the malady. I hid my sad predicament throughout the whole journey. Arriving at our final destination, the concentration camp Mauthausen in Austria, as usual, we were headed to the showers for disinfection, and then, of course, my sad predicament was discovered immediately. On the spot, I was separated from my group so fast that I hardly had a chance to say goodbye to my friends. They realized my sad situation and were sure by being taken away, never to be seen or heard from me ever again. To my amazement, I was led away to a barrack that served as a hospital ward. I had no idea how or why my life was there. The barrack was separated into two sections, with a door-like opening covered by a canvas curtain. At the door, a guard was standing, ready to let me into the second part of the barrack. The inmates in the first part of the barrack screamed at me not to go into the second area. I started to beg the door guard not to usher me through the canvas door into the second part of the barrack. The guard was sympathetic, explaining that because it was late at night, I would have to go into the second part. of the barrack, but he would get me first thing in the morning. As I walked in, it became clear why I was encouraged by all the inmates to try not to be placed at that part of the barrack. The air was filled with the stench. I could not hear anything but people yelling for help, helpless moaning from all over. At that point, I had nothing else in my mind except to put my head down and try to rest. I was exhausted. I found a bed bunk that only one person was lying in. It was, as I remember, on the second or third height bed bunk. In my sad predicament, I could not have cared less. As I was lying down next to the inmate who was occupying the bunk, I immediately felt his body was burning hot. He had an extremely high temperature. After a few hours, I awoke to the feeling of his body, which was now ice cold. I understood immediately that he had died. Though at this stage I was already used to seeing dead bodies, lying next to a dead person was still, especially at my age, a very scary experience. As soon as I realized what had happened, I jumped off the bunk and started to look for an attendant who could advise me of what to do. Indeed, after a long search, I found someone that I thought would be able to help me, to tell me what to do. His advice was simple and straightforward: push the body out of the bunk myself. Having no choice, I followed his advice and rolled out the body from the bunk. Being on the second or third level, the body landed with a great noise on the concrete floor below. It is a noise that continues to ring in my ears until today. Shortly thereafter, the door guard from the previous night came and transferred, as he had promised in the first section of the barrack. After I accommodated myself in one of the bunks, my skin illness was diagnosed, and I started to receive treatment consisting of a yellowish ointment that was spread all over my infected body. Indeed, after a few days, my itching stopped, and all the redness on the infected area of my body disappeared. To even my greatest surprise, after a day or two and a cold shower, I returned to my original group in the main camp of Manas. One day I was staying in Manas and came to an end. We got our marching orders and again were on our way. Of course, not knowing our final destination. We came to the end of our journey at a place called Gunskirchen. The camp was in the middle of the forest, and the conditions of Gunskirchen were the worst I had experienced till then. The wooden barracks were half finished, the doors and windows were not installed, so the barrack was open to the wind and rain. By this time, I was at the limit of my strength, and I had an uncontrollable diarrhea each time I tried reaching between the two barracks, where people relieved themselves. I found my effort was too late and in vain, and horribly there were dead bodies thrown into the pit. Finally, the day came. One morning, as we woke up, we saw an odd picture. There were no German guards around, and the rifles were standing up on the ground, 3 rifles each in a pile. Slowly realized that our suffering had ended, and finally, whoever was able to walk was free to go, to leave this inferno, this hell on earth, hopefully forever. A few days later, American soldiers from the 71st Division arrived and transferred us in trucks to Wels, Austria, a small city not far from Gunskirchen. Shortly after arriving, I started to realize that my health had deteriorated to such a degree that I was unable to care for myself anymore. I needed immediate medical attention. I managed to get admitted into the hospital the same day and was diagnosed with typhus, a disease that causes deadly fever and horrible diarrhea. Within a few weeks, thanks to the Americans who were overseeing my medical care, I was back on my feet. Shortly thereafter, with no food or transportation, a few Hungarian boys and I decided to return to our homes in Hungary. After a few days, we arrived back in Hungary. My uncle had survived the war in Hungary, and he and his wife happily welcomed me into their home. I soon discovered that my mother had also survived the camps and intended to return to Hungary in the coming weeks. A few weeks later, I was reunited with my mother, and we began to try to rebuild all that had been taken from us. After a few months, I realized there was no future in Hungary for me. Being a Jew after the war, we were not accepted as Hungarians. I decided to join the HaShoah in Budapest, a Zionist organization dedicated to helping survivors emigrate to our Jewish homeland, Palestine. It was there that I would meet my wife-to-be, who was also preparing to emigrate to Israel. In July 1946, a little more than a year after my liberation, we were informed that we had secured a ship to take us to Palestine. Within a week, we arrived on the shore of Haifa and the British Sea Starship. All of the passengers were taken to that fleet, an intern camp, Haftel, from the ones I had been in Poland, Germany, and Austria, but I can't remember less. Shortly after our arrival, Haganah negotiated an agreement to secure our release. Both me and my future wife were one of the few early releasees. We were embraced by a group of kibbutzniks of Kfar Blitzen. We stayed there for about a year working the land of Israel. Over the next year, we learned Hebrew and embraced the Sabra culture. I left the kibbutz to study carpentry in Angkor. My future wife, Aviva, would go to a kibbutz near Nagria. Shortly after her arrival, she was shot in her leg in an attack by Arabs and was transferred to a hospital in Haifa. Sometime in late 1947 or early 1948, I joined the Tzahal, the IDF, as an aide. In the early summer of 1948, my fellow soldiers and I were smuggled into the port of Haifa, which at the time was completely shut down to any civilian activity. Only British warships that were evacuating British troops were only British warships that were evacuating British troops were allowed to be there. We were there to prepare the ship to help bring our brothers and sisters who were being held in Cyprus. Finally, on a day that I will never forget, May 15, 1948, I witnessed the birth of the nation of Israel. I watched together with my fellow soldiers as the Union Jack was lowered from the port of Haifa, and then a Palmach unit quickly raised our flag, the Star of David, the flag of Israel. In 1951, as the luckiest man in the world, I married my wife Amina, who is here with me today, but my wife of 71 years. And in closing, as I stand before you today, I express my appreciation to HaShoah for all that I have merited to live to see. Aviva and I have 3 beautiful married grandchildren from our wonderful daughter and son-in-law, and have Leah and our 12 amazing grandchildren. Thank you for listening, and may Hashem bless us all.
Thank you so much for courage and strength to share your grandfather's story. I have a feeling that this is not going to be the only time you're going to be called upon to share your grandfather's story, because everybody needs to hear his story. At the bottom of every Matseva, or sometimes at the top, but it's there always, we have the following acronym: Taf Nun Sadik Pei Beis. The Hey Nishmatot Tzrura B'Tzrura Chaim, which means that the person's neshama should ever be bound in the bonds of life. And I think what that means for us, and for Meir, for you, is that your job, along with your siblings, is to forever ensure that your grandfather's story is forever within the bonds of the living. That story is perpetuated and retold and retold and retold. Everybody can hear that story, and the memory of Saul Graff can continue on for many, many years to come. I've come to reality. I see that there's a few children here, and I really, I think myself, and will my grandchildren, please God, ever meet a survivor? Not sure. If they do, will they remember a survivor? I'm not really sure. And as long as they are alive, it's our job to meet them, to learn from them, and to hear their stories. If what happened to Shomrei Torah, to the Graff and Witman families, is really a story of all of Klal Yisrael over the past 70, 80 years, we need to continue to perpetuate all the stories of those that survived and those that were murdered in the Shoah, to ensure that they're all bound in the bonds of life in the Tzrura Chaim. With that, I ask our unit to come up to recite the Kalmale, and everyone to please rise. We'll gather our right efforts.
Yom Rachamim, Shulchan Varonim, Yor Monus, Avi Sobim, Amtzim Honachona, Akafi Ashchina, Bima'alos, Kedoshim Tolim Kizora Kia, Asirim, the Nishmos, Alfei Yisrael, קדושים נשים בטף, שנהרגו ושנשחטו, שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנקברו, חיו על קידוש השם. כולם קדושים וטהורים, והם גאונים וצדיקים, ארזי הלבנון ואדירי התורה. בעל הרחמים, יסתירי בססר כנפיו בעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים נשמותיהם, וגליל תהיו בחסד. אדוני סום, יזכור על קדושו ושמו לנו ולכל ישראל צדקתם, ארץ אל תכסי דמה, ואל יהי מקום לזעקתם. בזכות זו ישובו נדחי ישראל לאחוזתם, הקדושים לזכרו תמיד נגד אדוני יעמדו לגורלם. יבואו שלום, ינוחו על משכבותיהם, ויקומו לקץ הימים וחיותם, ונאמר אמן.
The Matter downstairs right now. Thank you.